1967 is one of the seminal years of rock music. The summer of love and psychedelia dominated the year's impact on popular culture, arguably defining the decade as one overshadowed by its signature counterculture, the hippies. Several of rock's most influential albums were released within months of each other, including the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, Love's Forever Changes, and The Velvet Underground and Nico. It's the time when white-dominated rock music would cement itself as the mainstream hegemony of pop culture over the coming decades, taking over the radio waves and critical institutions like the Grammys. Today I'd like to talk about 1967's most eccentric rock album, one that subverted much of the dominating counterculture characteristics of the time. The Who Sell Out. The Who Sell Out is a simple concept record, which mimics the growing influence of rabid consumerism in the 1960s. It's, as David Marsh lovingly refers to it, a rock and roll mirror that reflects the times in which it was made. A pre-hippie culture that was rapidly changing, stuck between the days of commercially suitable, singles-focused, advertising-drenched AM radio and the encroaching influence of psychedelia and rock as serious art. It's not much like what we consider a concept album these days, that of the constant narrative interweavings that tie the tracks of an album together into a distant, thematically compelling whole. Instead, The Who Sell Out is strung together with the unifying theme of a mimic pirate radio broadcast.
Well, if you're feeling down, come on and get happy. Woo! With wonderful Radio
Pirate radio was pretty much what it says. Radio stations that were broadcasting literally on boats set at sea due to a loophole that declared the open oceans as international waters and thus not privy to the country's rigid broadcast laws. To The Who, this concept was intended as a love letter homage and protest for the pirates, which coincidentally also in 1967 were put out of commission with the Marine Broadcasting Offenses Act. The homage is warranted too, since pirate radio was indispensable in getting new bands like The Who airplay, and gave them the opportunity to cultivate audiences outside of mainstream radio play. In this sense, The Who Sell Out is a tongue-in-cheek eulogy and celebration of pirate radio, complete with authentic radio jingles, fake pop advertisements, and even a thematic album cover and sleeve. The band, like many other members of the UK rock scene, were disgruntled at the BBC for exerting their power over the pirate stations, and The Who Sell Out is a fitting document of this depressing display of government interference.
I wonder if other captains have these problems, but then they don't have a cereal named after them.
The record is also a biting pop glorification of the increasingly consumerist mindset of mainstream society in the post-World War II economic boom. The Who Sell Out sarcastically depicts a world where antiperspirant can be the difference between love and heartbreak, and acne cream can make you shine like a baby's bottom. It unites art with consumerism and advertising, something usually seen as a blatant detriment amongst the young rockers of the time. By uniting the inseparable relationship between pop music and capitalism, The Who create a glorious collage of soft character studies and catchy, affecting pop tunes. Really though, The Who were simply taking notes from the pop art movement in the UK and US at the time. Pop art, an artistic movement mostly prolific throughout the 50s and 60s, mainly aimed to repurpose imagery from mass media, like advertising and comics, to make its audience recontextualize and reinterpret it in a new way, often directly criticizing, satirizing, or even glorifying the very pop culture it was drawing from. UK pop artists were particularly enamored with the mass pop culture of the United States, an influence that would trickle down to the British invasion rockers after them. Peter Blake, perhaps the UK's most famous pop artist, created the cover for Sgt. Pepper, and later did artwork for several Who albums.
Caroline, the sign of a nation. Caroline!
The pirate radio scene was arguably part of pop art itself, too, with its glossy, hard-to-resist jingles, most of which were recorded in the US, and fixation on the new, hip, and very American trend transfixing young people. Rock and roll and R&B.
Much more Radio 1 music. Womp bom balloon bom 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 to the boot.
Rock music helped reshape the cultural landscape of England to be more youth and American-oriented. The Who were clearly inspired by pop art before The Who Sell Out too, drawing on it for their fashion and songwriting sensibilities. Townsend even went as far to say, "We stand for pop art clothes, pop art music, and pop art behavior." Selling out, too, is kind of a tired, unnecessarily hostile, and vague term itself. Of course, selling out as a concept is not unique to the music industry, or even to how an artist in particular makes a living. It's a term usually associated with some political or cultural value that dates back centuries, against the growing influence of money and industry over government policy or societal function. In the research paper Questioning Worth, Selling Out in the Music Industry, the researchers determined that an artist can only seem to sell out if their audience perceives them as having an authenticity based in the inspired world, meaning having their art based on a purely artistic or emotional basis, and then transitioning into the market world, or the drive to mass appeal and the pursuit of monetary gains without authentic artistic intent. People who sell out are often ones who are believed to have steadfast ideologies that challenge the status quo and live in opposition to mainstream ideas and establishments. Selling out then becomes an implicit act, not through an explicit renouncement for their previous beliefs or integrity, but through an implicit pursuit of profitability. For an artist to sell out, it means they traded in their ideology or artistic integrity for commercial gain or appeal. Selling out is inextricably linked to loss of worth gained in the inspired world. To create music while being driven by the market world ideals to increase sales, or simply for commercial gains, is perceived to be exploitative of the fans and consumers.
Isn't this fun? Staples, that was easy.
The Who, at least in the 1960s, were arguably synonymous with the inspired world of the anti-establishment counterculture aestheticism of rock and roll angst. Their early and still maybe most iconic song, My Generation, was a staunch middle finger to traditionalism and an anthem for youth culture. They were infamous for destroying their instruments after shows in a defiant, violent act of performance art aggression, and were even sold by their manager Kit Lambert as a new form of crime, armed against the bourgeois. They were in crippling debt, too, into the $100,000 range, at least according to Roger Daltrey. Pete Townsend even claimed that they would have been jailed if not for Tommy's success, since they simply weren't paying all of their taxes at the time. They were touring and appearing on TV specials just to scrape enough money together to get studio time. They even recorded a jingle for Coca-Cola that apparently was never really used.
Coke after Coke after Coke after Coca-Cola.
John Atkins, in his book The Who on Record, A Critical History, suggests that the underground scene in the UK was a radical movement centered around magazines Oz and International Times, which advocated that rock and roll should play its part as a revolutionary tool, rather than a mere commercial entertainment.
Townsend, The Who, Roger Daltrey, Entwistle, Moon could rise this country out of its decadent, ambient state more than Wilson and those crappy people could ever hope to achieve.
Of course, all this 60s rock as revolution counterculture has been analyzed time and time again, and reevaluated as an effective form of political and social protest. But for the time, especially in the rowdy early period, they were hardly an act one could accuse of selling out. So to come out of seemingly nowhere with an album so out there as The Who Sell Out was quite an artistic upset. Titling the album The Who Sell Out called attention to the mythic status of rock and roll's, well, role in youth counterculture. The band were breaking the mysticism of the art form and signaling its inherent ties to consumerism, that rock and pop music at large weren't at odds with commercialization, but tied to commercialization. In '67, Townsend said that the title refers to the fact that we've sold out to the concept of advertising. We've got to do commercials on the album. We wanted to do The Who Sell Out just to make fun of ourselves to a degree. We wanted, as I said, to take away some of the gravity that seemed to be wearing down the group in America. We wanted to change the fact that so many fans take us so seriously. Townsend also found this album to be a defining moment for the band. When we finally got the whole album package together, I remember thinking it was like the closing of a chapter. It was the last word. The art director suggested calling it The Who Sell Out. It's such a fucking brilliant title, because in a sense, everything The Who have done since, with Tommy, Live at Leeds, Who's Next, and so on, and with everything I've done since, has all been about burning not so much of the family silver, but the authenticity, originality, and coolness of The Who's first 2 years. Everything else rides on that moment. Of course, the story of how the album came to be is interesting in and of itself, and despite how brilliant it is upon listening, a lot of it stemmed from happenstance. It might be surprising to hear that the initial jolt to record the album was prompted not solely from the artistic credibility of the Inspired World, but partly just from pressure to release another record by Christmas from the band's co-manager Chris Stamp. Townsend, who thought the songs that Stamp had suggested to release weren't good enough, went into art school mode, in his words. He'd studied graphic design and advertising in college, and thought that after the release of their second album, A Quick One, the next album needed something to differentiate it from their previous two albums and to tie it together as a full package. The idea eventually came to the band after Townsend demoed the song Odorono, a tune fashioned in the style of a radio advertisement about the needs of a quality antiperspirant. Running with the idea, the band brainstormed a ton of radio jingles and pop tunes inspired by real products, from the short mini ads for Rotosound Springs to songs that didn't even make it onto the record, like Jaguar, inspired by the line of cars. The album's cover and sleeve work, which is still some of my absolute favorite, was designed by art director David King and designer Roger Law, while the props used in the photos were made by Law's wife, Deidre Amsden. Law and King, as Townsend said earlier, came up with the title for the record, and they actually claimed that Townsend was somewhat reluctant to use it at the time. The photo shoot was seemingly thrown together without much planning. The beans used for Daltrey shot were so cold that, to keep Daltrey from freezing, they stuck an electric fire behind the bath, which only ended up making him more uncomfortable. Roger Daltrey even claims to have gotten pneumonia from his dip in the freezing cold beans. The surreal, tongue-in-cheek little advert blurbs donning each shot on the covers were written up by Dennis Hackett, an editor of Queen magazine and photographer Harry Peccinati. In an act of editorial failure, they apparently spelled Daltrey wrong on the first pressing of the album. It's said that either the band's co-manager Chris Stamp or Pete Townsend actually wanted to push the advertisement theme a bit farther by selling the space between the songs to actual advertisers. After learning the projected sales target for the album was only 50,000 copies, however, advertisers quickly lost interest in pursuing this idea.
Us Tarryton smokers would rather fight than switch.
Music, that's our middle name.
The record presents The Who at their glossiest and cleanest up until that point. The production is crisp, compared to the muddy ruggedness of their first two albums, and features a significant step up in instrumental complexity. In another display of eccentric weirdness, the album opens not with a song, but a Pam's production radio jingle, simply announcing the days of the week, slowly fading out as we reach Sunday.
Monday.
Pam's was a prolific radio jingle company out of Texas that provided many of the jingles for the pirate radio stations. This weird, almost robotically monotonous jingle kicks the album off with a direct acknowledgement of the record's pirate radio inspiration, and its slow fade into silence is kind of a weird, bitter send-off to the death of pirate radio. Another weirdly timely, almost meta-creative decision, the first proper song is wildly different from any Who song that preceded it, taking inspiration from a new rock subgenre that was exploding in popularity and enticing the most cutting-edge rock listeners of 1967, psychedelia. Armonia City in the Sky is the only track on the album, and one of the only in their canon, to not be written by a member in the band. It was actually written by John Speedy Keane, a friend of The Who and member of the band Thunderclap Newman. The song is a pretty blatant appeal to LSD, a suddenly trendy subject that was often avoided or outright criticized in the rest of The Who's catalog.
If you're troubled and you can't relax, close your eyes, think on this.
Opening a pop record about consumerism in 1967 with a psychedelic track is perhaps the trendiest choice they could have gone with, and is so on the nose that it reeks of parody. Drug use, especially LSD, was becoming a major talking point amongst the hippie movement, and of course became the iconic boogeyman for the conservative establishment of the late 60s. The lyrics echo the Beatles' breakthrough song Tomorrow Never Knows, another song with psychedelic vibes and inspiration from LSD. The song itself even pokes fun at drug culture somewhat, with the cliché segment at the end where the lyrics freak out are repeated. Daltrey's vocals are absurdly high-pitched, way out of his normal register. The production is complex, especially for a Who song, featuring a horn section played backwards, guitar feedback laced with whooping effects, all sorts of studio fuzz, echoes, and tape delays. It kicks off the album on a trippy note, which is almost a misnomer for the rest of the record.
Wonderful Radio London. Whoopee.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Armonia is quickly followed by something wildly different, the band's first commercial parody, Heinz Baked Beans, which was written by John Entwistle, the band's drummer. It's pretty simple too, just a horn-driven tune detailing a family's discussion over what they'll be eating tonight. The song suggests the lazy, idyllic lifestyle of a British family whose only trouble today is what's for lunch. Entwistle even does his weirdo monster voice from Boris the Spider to portray the decaying-sounding mother in the family. The song, too, is musically a rehash of 1966 Who instrumental Cobwebs and Strange, which is also by itself one of the band's weirdest songs. Heinz Baked Beans is truly where you're reassured that this shit is British as fuck and will only get stranger and more eccentric from here on out.
More music, more music, more music, more music.
Marianne with the Shaky Hand completes one of my favorite triplets in rock music. The flow between Armonia, Baked Beans, and Marianne, linked between the sampled pirate radio jingles, still electrifies me every time with how smooth it's all put together. It perfectly interweaves the pop artistry of The Who's unique catchy tunes with the vapidly obnoxious in-your-face radio jingles. This triplet also shows off how effective a well-put-together record can be. By uniting individual songs together into a cohesive whole, it makes them more than the sum of their parts, and solidifies them as powerful artistic statements that might not have been as strong otherwise. Centered around an almost sickeningly sweet vocal and Townsend's strong, ringing acoustic guitar, Marianne actually has a couple of different recorded versions, which all sound a little bit different from one another. The one on the album is acoustic, of course, while the other versions floating around on various reissues incorporate slightly different instrumentation, including electric guitar parts. I still think the version that ended up on the record is the best, though. Marianne shares similar themes with another 67 Who tune, Pictures of Lily. At their core, both songs are simply about, jacking off.
Pictures of Lily.
The character of the song details several of the loves of his life, admiring what makes each of them unique, distilling them down to such one-dimensionally basic characteristic that reads like a parody of male chauvinism.
Linda can cook. She reads books. Cindy can sew. But I'd rather know.
In the end, though, the character ends up at the conclusion that no matter how good you can dance or how fast you can read, no one can compete with one of Marianne's wank jobs. It's, of course, a very juvenile idea for a song, but it highlights the uniqueness of Townsend's songwriting. Of course, innuendo was nothing new to pop music, but Townsend's knack for getting right to the nitty-gritty of the teenage sexual libido creates some of the best pop songs of the 1960s, and Marianne is really one of the era's richest love songs. The use of what sounds like castanets is subtly hilarious too. I always took it as the sonic equivalent meant to represent Marianne's perpetual handshake, kind of like the sound a cartoon skeleton makes when it dances. The effect on Daltrey's last reading of the shaky hand line is great too. Marianne is followed by another Townsend love song, this one perhaps even more tongue-in-cheek than the last. It's also the first full ad song, Odorono.
She sang the best she'd ever sang. She could never sing any better, but Mr. Davidson never rang. She knew he would forget her.
Odorono Odorono tells the story of a young singer dealing with love troubles after a particularly impressive and laborious performance. The woman of the song, despite singing the best she'd ever sang and being happier than she'd ever been, still can't seem to lock down the date she's been eyeing. In the finale of the song, it's revealed that the woman's love interest, upon smelling her wretched B.O., loses interest in her and leaves her hanging. The song is kind of a parody of the entertainment industry's obsession with beauty over talent, as well as the commercial prospect that a product can be the difference between happiness and failure. Without getting too serious about it, because it's supposed to be very light, that's life, Townshend says of the song. Odorono works to show off Townshend's unique knack of turning the drab, ordinary nature of modern living into melodramatically compelling storytelling that's worthy of focus and empathy. The Who are doing what most advertisements are designed to do: associate their product with a universality that most anyone can relate to. And let me tell you, if commercials had songs this good, I maybe wouldn't use ad blockers as aggressively. Odorono is absolutely one of the best Who songs. It's got that deep, anthemic, soaring quality that The Who would go on to perfect on later releases. The segue leading out of Odorono has great comedic timing, too, that pierces the dramatic poignancy in a unique way only an intrusive, unwanted radio jingle can. Townshend's downtrodden vocal performance, concluding the tragic tale of a woman's stinky armpits, is somewhat crudely and abruptly followed by the cheery Radio London jingle.
Her deodorant had let her down. She should have used Odorono.
It's smooth sailing with the highly successful sound of wonderful Radio London.
Tattoo is another absolute classic. It opens with a distinctly memorable arpeggio, and employs a sort of proto-arena rock sound, complete with echoey vocals and acoustic guitar. Otherwise, the arrangement is relatively understated. Even Moon's drumming sounds contained to give the song an almost ballad-like feel. Tattoo also shows off what might be Townshend's most thought-provoking sentiment of his career thus far. The song was partially inspired by the relentless life of touring cross-country, and the tatted-up men Townshend met along his travels. It's essential to The Who Sell Out because it occupies the central theme of most of The Who's best material: youthful angst. All Tattoo is really about is two young brothers who decide to get tattoos to feel more like real men, to hopefully score wives that are as tatted up as them.
Me and my brother were talking to each other about what makes a man a man. Was it brain or brawn or the month you were born? We just couldn't understand.
Tragically, though, the boys are ultimately reminded of their lack of what they'd consider manhood. The boys are punished by real adults, and are sorely reminded that they are still just boys. Townshend doesn't really come to an answer to the question of what makes a man, suggesting that there really isn't one. There are only people who grow up and decide for themselves who they want to be and how they want to engage with the world. The Maud character in My Generation who exclaims, "I hope I die before I get old," may one day actually get old, and at that point, will they like what they see? Will they like who they've become? Will they be a man?
Welcome to my life tattoo. I'm a man now, thanks to you.
The song even ends with nonsense too, as if Townshend is intentionally avoiding ending the song with a direct moral. Or maybe he just ran out of words, I don't know. The Rudy Toot Toot was inspired by one of the band's roadies who would sing tunes as he worked in a similar nonsense manner.
Radio London reminds you, go to the church of your choice.
Our Love Was is a love song that's not about love. It's more of a eulogy for a previous relationship. Townshend described a love that was soaring, shining, like a summer morning, but also one out of famine and frustration. The character of the song looks at the relationship in a somewhat detached fashion, not hateful, spiteful, or hopeful, just describing the good and the bad of a failed relationship. Musically, Our Love Was is similar to Tattoo. It builds subtly through the verses, with its conservative use of percussion, including a tenderly played triangle, that eventually erupts into the bridge as the vocal harmonies shout out the lyrics, "Love, love, love long."
Long, love,
love, love, long, love, 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 long, love, 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 long, love, 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 long.
The song then collapses into a beautiful soaring sound, complete with Entwistle's horn section and a particularly electrifying guitar solo. Immediately following Our Love Was is a series of jingles, one taken from Radio London, one referencing the Speakeasy nightclub the band would frequent in London, and a somewhat legitimate ad for Rotosound strings, which were Entwistle's favorite. Finally, side one closes with the album's best song, I Can See for Miles. Another heartbreak song, similar to Our Love Was, although this one is more concretely critical of the relationship. I Can See for Miles lifts off into the musical stratosphere, rocketing you far into the deep depths where only great pop music can take you. Lyrically, it's a paranoid and selfishly cynical song about a jealous lover, inspired by Townsend's own love life. Everything coalesces perfectly on this song. Daltrey's confident and almost sinisterly suggestive vocals are perfectly supported by triple-tracked vocals by Townsend, Daltrey, and Entwistle. Moon's barreling drums crash like fireworks and coalesce into a machine gun of sound at the chorus. Townsend's guitar dances effortlessly all over the song.
Well, there's a poke at you, you're gonna choke on it too, you're gonna lose that smile, because all the while I could see for miles and miles, I could see for miles and miles, I could see for miles and miles.
I Can See for Miles also represents the main contradiction of The Who Sell Out. It's a defining artistic accomplishment from a band deep in the inspired world, but a band that was also desperate for commercial success. In fact, Townsend was so obsessed with the single's commercial viability that he looked at it as The Who's trump card. He'd been sitting on the song for a while, deciding to save it for a rainy day if the band ever ran out of steam and simply needed a big hit to save them from running out of cash. He was steadfast in the single's ability to be a #1 hit. Unfortunately, it never reached #1 though. It was still a modest hit. It climbed to #9 on the US Billboard Top 100 and #10 on the UK singles chart. Townsend, while believing the song deserved more, considered it a failure and was disappointed in the British public for not sending it to the top. When I saw it was about to go down without reaching any higher, I spat on the British record buyer. To me, that was the ultimate Who record, yet it didn't sell. Rock music has always ridden the tightrope between art and commercial. It's reliant on youthfulness and anti-conformity, but it's still contrasted with the desire for stardom and mass appeal. Artists often want to be original and confrontational, but the importance of selling records is always nagging. Townsend's obsession with I Can See for Miles is central to the complex relationship between rock, art, and commercial viability.
I could see for miles and miles, I could see for miles and miles.
The Charles Atlas course with dynamic tension can turn you into a beast of a man.
Side 2 somewhat weirdly dumps the concept of the pirate radio broadcast. It's still a great collection of songs, albeit not as transcendent as the first side. Can't Reach You is another pained love song, describing a man who is fantasizing about his lover with golden hair that seems to be a world away. The song was one of two inspired by the anxieties of air travel, the other song being Glow Girl, which didn't make the album but is on later reissues. Townsend infamously had a terrible out-of-body experience after taking LSD on an airplane, which made him write off the drug entirely. It also reflects Townsend's growing proclivity for spirituality. The song was written before his lifelong fascination with Meher Baba, the Indian spiritual master whom Townsend became a devoted student of, but it still subtly predicts his yearning for the deep inward actualization he received from his teachings.
I can't reach you, I strain my eyes, I can't reach you, I split my sides, I can't reach, trying to get on your seat, feel on him, run, yeah.
Can't Reach You is also distinct for Townsend's early use of the piano, the simplicity of its usage a result of his inexperience with the instrument. Townsend would grow more accustomed with keyboards over the years, and would later feature them in some of the most iconic key parts in rock history.
Henry Palm, that no far, had a face like a currant bun. This adolescent little fella was nicknamed by his friends Old Yeller.
Medak is another ad tune, the second song written by John Entwistle. This time the product of choice is an acne cream. The song mirrors the general message of most acne cream ads. Use this product and it'll smooth out those blemishes, making your face like a baby's bottom. Medak completes a sort of loose trilogy of songs strung together with a common theme, the plague of adolescence, the other two songs being Odorono and Tattoo. All three songs empathize, celebrate, and poke fun at a culture obsessed with quick fixes in an effort to find themselves through the use of commercial commodities.
You'll look better fast.
Henry in the mirror appeared, his pimples all had disappeared. Henry laughed and yelled, I got him, your face is like a baby's bottom.
Relax is an acid rock-inspired track, another artistic abnormality for the band up until that point. It's a brief tune that complements the poppy psychedelic tendencies of Armonia, contrasting that song's refrain of Freak Out with Relax. John Atkins, in The Who on Record, interprets this track as an ode to hedonism, or the pursuit of pleasure, an ideology often associated with the sunshine, flower power-obsessed hippie movement.
Relax and settle down. Let your mind go round. Lay down on the ground and listen to the sound of the band. Hold my hand.
This interpretation makes sense coming from The Who. Although they weren't hippies at all, they weren't afraid to not take themselves too seriously. Chris Charlesworth, in A Guide to the Music of The Who, implies the song was similar to Armonia, influenced by the growing drug culture, especially by the bands indulging in it, like Pink Floyd. Townsend was a public admirer of Pink Floyd, so it's not a big stretch, especially with the organ use on the song, something that they really didn't dabble in too much. Apparently the song's guitar solo could even reach the lengths of 10 minutes during live performances, another very Floyd-esque idea.
Hold your group together with rotor sound strings. Once upon a time there lived an old miser man by the name of Silas Stingy.
Silas Stingy is the third and final Entwistle tune, and probably the most explicit and straight-up social commentary on the album. A Dickensian character song in tune with Medak and Odorono, although this one isn't really an ad. The song describes the sad tale of the old miser Silas Stingy, a penny-pinching grump who's mocked by the kids about town as moneybags and mingy stingy. Silas becomes so paranoid of someone stealing his fortune that he accidentally ends up spending it all to defend it, including buying a safe to keep his money in, a house to put the safe in, and even a watchdog on a chain to ward off trespassers. The moral of the story is an almost biblical metaphor. Don't worry too much about money, or you might find yourself poorer than when you began. It's kind of a funny message coming from a band reportedly in thousands of dollars of debt, but Silas is another song that strikes at the core of the record. Life is not about money, and to pursue it means you might lose sight of what's really important. Entwistle apparently wrote the song from a place of personal experience, too. I found it very hard going because our expenses were so ridiculous and our earnings weren't that big, so I saved every penny to put a deposit on a house and bought furniture. So Silas Stingy buying a house and a watchdog and a safe is exactly what happened to me.
There goes Mingy Stingy. There goes Mingy Stingy.
Sunrise is a quiet, tender Who track, another song very different from anything they'd previously recorded. It's a solo acoustic song, written by Townsend back in 1964 to prove to his mother he could write real music. It's also a beautiful and simple love song, contrasting the biting edge of Our Love Was and I Can See for Miles. The song is an ode to a lover that takes the breath away from the character who was keeping it for sunrise.
You take away the breath I was keeping for sunrise. You appear in the morning, looks drab in my eyes.
Sunrise's intricate guitar work was spurred by Townsend's use of the guitar course books Mickey Baker's Jazz Guitar Tutors. With its, by comparison, complex guitar licks and subtly honest approach to love and beauty, it adds a certain tender twist to an album otherwise full of sarcasm, childish humor, paranoia, and pettiness.
Then again you disappear, my morning put to shame.
The album's closer, Real, is a story that chugs along about an explorer crossing the open seas, reminiscing about their homeland of Real, which is being invaded by the Red Chins seeking to wreak chaos. Real was supposedly the condensed version of a much larger idea in Townsend's head. He initially intended the song to work as an opera independently of The Who. Kit Lambert ended up pressuring him into cutting it down since the band needed a single. The song still works well enough on its own as it is, but there's definitely a hint of a larger, more ambitious narrative than what we got on the record. It's weirdly fitting to end a record joking about commercialization with a song that was seemingly forced into a consolidated version by management out of a need to pump out more singles. According to Chris Charlesworth, there may be some political message nestled somewhere in this song too. Real is thought to possibly be shorthand for Israel, and the Red Chins might be inspired by the Chinese. Townsend has even explicitly said that some of the story is inspired by the growing population of China, slowly stamping out organized religions as they grow in size and influence across the world. This interpretation is pretty loose though, since the song was so effectively squashed into 5 minutes. No one will ever know what it means. It has been squeezed up too tightly to make sense.
The yellow flag is fluttering, sickly held against the wall. Then you know my courage is ended, and you'll send your bow ashore.
Altogether, The Who Sell Out is a wonderfully accessible, deliciously fun record that shows off not only The Who's growing musical prowess, but also Townsend's unique songwriting abilities. In the age of pop becoming art, it's perfectly unpretentious in its approach to the concept of the concept album, and succeeds at tying every song together into a complete product. It's pretty brief too, sitting at just under 39 minutes or so, which was a pretty typical length for rock LPs at the time. It's also the last document of The Who before they would skyrocket into worldwide stardom. That success was not meant to be quite yet, though. It did okay in the UK, reaching number 13 on the LP charts. In the US, however, outside of the brief success of I Can See for Miles, it went almost entirely unnoticed. The album's most glaring flaw, that the pirate radio concept sort of trails off in the second half, has never really been explained. It's still kind of a mystery why The Who's brilliant idea was not as consistent throughout the entire record, especially since the band easily recorded enough songs and advertisements to follow through. Despite this flaw, the album is still a one-of-a-kind masterpiece. No artist has replicated its unique sense of style and stands firmly alongside any of the great albums of the rock era. It's a love letter to the chaotic, consumer-minded 60s, a culture obsessed with art, youthful counterculture, and consumption. It's a lovingly tailored ode to the types of aggressively normal weirdos who deal with the universal insecurities around masculinity, love lives, BO, and face acne. The Who Sell Out has gone on to provide influence for a number of sardonic acts that followed. The Sex Pistols' strange rock and roll swindle echoes the album's legacy. Queens of the Stone Age released their own radio-inspired concept album with Songs for the Deaf. Arcade Fire's album Everything Now utilizes corporate-esque logos designed to represent each song. The band has also been credited for predicting the encroaching influence of commercialization in rock music.
Do I buy Country Life butter because it's British?
Selling Out and the unity between consumerism and the music industry has been in maximum overdrive since the idealistic pop-obsessed 60s. Just look at Lil Nas X and Nike. All those weird Iggy Pop commercials. That time Denny's had a Rockstar menu featuring Sum 41 and Rascal Flatts. The Grateful Dead and Igloo Coolers for some reason. Jack Harlow and New Balance, and Jack Harlow and KFC.
Y'all ready?
It may be a stretch to say The Who really predicted any of this, though, since this sort of commercialization was already pretty prevalent in their heyday. Plenty of pop artists were doing commercials already, like Dusty Springfield and the Rolling Stones.
Get up in the morning to the pop that says it's Rice. Hear them talking Rice Krispies.
Consumer capitalism was growing rapidly in the post-war era, and in some way, rock and pop music were merely products of it. A lot of great artists were accused of selling out back then too, to the point of rendering the phrase moot. Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention own concept album, We're Only in It for the Money, was directly calling out Sgt. Pepper for artistic bankruptcy. After the timid reception of The Who Sell Out, the band would finally get what they'd been fighting for: commercial viability.
Remember this golden classic.
Tommy catapulted them into superstar status, especially in the US, and absolved them of the debts that plagued them for most of the 60s. It also re-established them as artistic pioneers, once again pushing the concept LP ahead, this time with a rock opera centered around the blind, deaf, and dumb boy whom the album is named after.
How can he be saved from eternal grave? Much more music.
Who's Next would sell even better and solidify them as angst icons of the teenage wasteland and the disaffected generation born out of the idealism of the 1960s counterculture. Baba O'Reilly in particular was directly inspired by The Who's performance at Woodstock and Townsend's disapproving outlook on the impact of hippie culture.
Radio 1 Music Scene. When I say I love you, you say you better. You better.
Like most every rock band inevitably does, The Who would begin to run out of steam, and would break up after releasing 2 albums after the death of Keith Moon. This is where the legacy of The Who Sell Out becomes interesting once again, though. Over the last 20-odd years, The Who have maintained relevancy not just as rock icons who continue to sell out stadium tours, but also as their best, most defining work is reappropriated for commercial use. In an age where music sales are continually falling and artists have to look for alternative avenues to make money for their work, The Who songs are blasted all over television, selling products like Nissan Maximas and Dell computers. Their iconic Won't Get Fooled Again became an internet meme after its use in CSI Miami. You can still catch them live on one of their many stadium tours. There's all sorts of official and unofficial Who merch plastered with the band's classic iconography, and their albums are semi-regularly remastered and re-released as extensive and expensive reissues. While The Who are long past their artistic prime, their legacy lives on through the commercial exploitation of their music. In a 1999 Rolling Stone article chronicling the recent trend of Who's songs showing up in ads, something the band had been careful to avoid for years, an attorney estimated that it would cost around $500,000 just to use Won't Get Fooled Again in an ad. Not too shabby for a band previously recording Coke jingles to stay afloat. Townsend now doesn't even have control over his own music after selling his publishing rights for millions to the Spirit Music Group, who also own the rights to other artists like Charles Mingus, Chaka Khan, T-Rex, and Tim McGraw. Using pop songs in advertising is simply a fast, safe, and lucrative way for a company to associate their product with the feeling elicited from the iconic, emotionally resonant nature of music. It's no wonder what marketing value advertisers see in the coolness of The Who. Their best songs are still instantly identifiable and have punctured pop culture as symbols of the outsider renegade who fights for their meals and tips their hat to the new revolution. Commercialization has successfully turned The Who and most every great band of the rock era into pop culture icons, whose image can now be easily reappropriated, repackaged, and resold, long after their peak years have gone and rock music has fallen out of mainstream fashion. But of course, as The Who pointed out in 1967, this is nothing new. It's simply the unbreakable chain between consumer culture and pop music. The use of pop culture and counterculture has been the normal evolutionary trajectory of advertising for over half a century now. As Thomas Frank writes in Conquest of Cool, advertisers evolved alongside the 60s counterculture to come to the same conclusion, that individualism would be the defining feature of pop culture moving forward. What happened in the 60s is that hip became central to the way American capitalism understood itself and explained itself to the public. He refers to this phenomenon as hip capitalism. In 1970, author and musician Michael Lydon identified this unity, saying, "From the start, rock has been commercial. It was never an art form that just happened to make money, nor a commercial undertaking that sometimes became art. Its art was synonymous with its business. Advertisers are simply just appropriating the coolness and individualism unique to rock and roll to sell to a mainstream audience, similar to how the British invasion rockers were appropriating rock and roll from black musicians in America." Jolanta Szymkowska-Bartyzel makes a similar observation on the relationship between counterculture and consumerism in her work Counterculture and Hypercapitalism, Commodifying the Rebel. She's actually discussing how the mainstream public adopted Harley-Davidson motorcycles, another counterculture icon of the late 60s, but I think this can also be applied to rock and roll. Counterculture ideas spread like wildfire, turning into a serious social movement that initially changes and modifies the mainstream culture in order to finally become mainstream itself. This is truly a great metaphor for The Who's career trajectory. Once a fiery, untamable aspect of cool youth counterculture, eventually turned into a mainstream phenomenon that can now profit from the commercial viability of their greatest artistic accomplishments. Townshend seemed to struggle with this dichotomy himself, at least at one time. In a Penthouse interview from 1974, he said, "I have to admit, I almost feel guilty about my position. If you think about it, I'm really using the kids. About 5 years ago, there was a big thing going on in rock about the bands financially exploiting the audience by high ticket prices. I had big rows of people over that. I'll admit that I'm exploiting, but not by high ticket prices. I'm taking their thoughts, their moods, their feelings, and I'm giving it back to them. For that they call me a genius. All I'm doing is telling them how they are. That is the exploitation part that worries me, but I suppose if they're nuts enough to pay me for it, then it must be cool. Still, I feel so guilty that when I meet up with my admirers, I really try to relate it to them. I feel that exploitation factor is the biggest problem in rock." Later in the interview, he even criticizes the idea of The Who continuing past their prime. Even if one can get away with it, hypocrisy is not tolerable in something as intrinsically honest as rock and roll. It's very hypocritical for a band like The Who to stand on stage and pretend that they're adolescents, when all they're really doing is reliving their adolescence. As a rock band grows older and continues to tour their old material, they move on from being a mouthpiece for the youth, expressing their depressions and frustration through music, and begin to work as a means for older generations to relive their days of youth and give them a chance to remember what it felt like to be young, to be a part of the generation that hoped they died before they got old. It's a repackaging of the product of The Who to give people the feeling they had in their youth. Modern Townshend, who is seemingly still artistically active in multiple facets, now seems perfectly happy to rely on his legacy for monetary gain. In a 2021 interview with Uncut, Townshend said, "I cash in on my past. I live off it. I tour with Roger, I make a bit of money, but I don't do it because I love it. I do it because it keeps interest in the past." Townshend claims his somewhat passionless cash-in on his legacy is an effort to fund future projects, similar to how The Who would record ads back in the day to get studio time. And more power to him, honestly. Over the years, he's become an admirable philanthropist and advocate for a number of charity causes, and these efforts arguably eclipse the importance of any of his musical achievements, sellout or otherwise. The Who have come full circle from the simple days of The Who Sell Out. From making little money, doing coke ads to stay afloat, to releasing an incredible album poking fun at themselves, pop culture, and the consumerism it marinates in, to their songs being used in commercials, TV shows, and even shitty YouTube videos like this one. This really feels like the endgame for pop art, honestly. The Who Sell Out is a mirror, reflecting a culture that birthed pop music and rock and roll, the cultural melting pot that gave us pirate radio and pop art. Rock and consumerism are intertwined, destined to rely on each other to create great music and also make a shitload of money. The album is still as socially relevant as it was 50 years ago, something that can't be said for much of the music from that period. In a world where many of the great pop legacies of the 20th century serve now to be reused for advertising and commercial profitability, its irony, parody, and celebration of consumer culture is arguably even more poignant now.
England's finest.
Welcome. Welcome to a brand new day.
Swinging Radio England. Out of sight.
The next game begins when the last one ends.
New G2 from Gatorade. The low
International. Go, go. 247 Radio 1.
I can see for miles and miles and miles and miles and where the action is.